Hi and welcome to another story, and today we have part 11 of Candyfloss by Jacqueline Wilson, continuing from chapter 21. We had to go to hospital. I was completely fine, but they needed to check that I hadn't inhaled too much smoke. Dad had burns on his hands where he'd fought his way forward to grab me. They were both bandaged up so that it looked as if he was wearing white boxing gloves. Dad was very brave and didn't even flinch when the nurse rubbed ointment on, but I started crying. Hey, Floss, no tears, sweetheart. I'm fine. Look, I'm being wound up like an ancient Egyptian. Only I'm not a mummy, I'm a daddy. It wasn't really funny, but I sniffled a little, and the nurse laughed out loud. Don't worry, dear, your dad's going to be as right as rain. He'll have to keep his bandages on for a bit, but he should heal up nicely. It'll be a good excuse for him to sit back and have your mum wait on him for a week or so. I said. I patted Dad's knee. I'll wait on you, Dad. You saved my life. You're a hero. Rubbish, pet. I didn't do anything, said Dad. Yes, you did, mate, said Saul, poking his head around the cubicle curtain. His arm was in a sling because one of the guys had tried to knife him. You saved me, too, grabbing that punk by the wrist. So he dropped his knife, he said. I wasn't really thinking straight. I just caught hold of him, and as luck would have it, that's when he dropped the knife, said Dad. No, your little girl's right. You're a hero, said Jenny, Saul's girlfriend. Saul had to take off his huge silver skull rings and bangles, so he was wearing them for him, jangling and clanking every time she moved her arms. She stroked Saul's sore arm tenderly. It's only a flesh wound, but it could have been far worse, she said. Dad and Saul had to give statements to a policeman, though I kept dozing off while they were talking because it was in the middle of the night now. I cuddled Dimble and Ellerina, who were a little singed but safe. Every time I went to sleep, I heard the ugly raised voices. I felt the thuds, the shaking. I saw the sudden gold-red flare of flame, and I started crying. Each time Dad held me in his arms, patting me with his big bandaged hands, soothing me. Come on, I've got to get my little girl home, said Dad, and eventually they let us go. We had no way of getting back from the hospital, and Dad didn't have much cash on him, but Saul and Jenny were waiting, and they shared a taxi with us, taking us all the way to Billy the Chip's house for nothing. If you'd like to come back tomorrow, I'll give you the fare, said Dad. Think nothing of it, mate. Still, I might well come back visiting, said Saul. They dropped us off, and we staggered up the path to Billy's. I had to feel in Dad's pocket for the key and open the front door for us. Lucky and Whiskey and Soda were waiting worriedly in the hall, twining themselves around our ankles like furry feather boas, wondering why we'd been out so late. Let's get straight to bed, little Floss, said Dad. It's all right now, baby. We're safe and sound. But as he said it, he suddenly started shaking. Floss, I can't believe how stupid I've been, dragging you off to that van night after night. You could have been burned to a crisp and it would have all been my fault. No, Dad, it wasn't your fault, silly. You rescued me. I'm fine. We're both fine, I said, putting my arms around Dad and hugging him tight. Dad cried a little bit while I patted him on the back. Then his nose started running and he couldn't blow it properly with his poor bandaged hands, so I had to help him. It's like you're my big baby, Dad, I said. I had to help him undo all his buttons and shoelaces so he could get ready for bed. When I was in bed myself, Dad lay down in the end with his pillow and blanket, so that every time I dreamed about the fire I woke up, he could soothe me back to sleep. He said I could stay off school in the morning. We didn't set the alarm, but we both woke up very early, even so. We had to have a special long cuddle just to make sure we were both all right. I'll have to phone poor Billy and tell him what's happened to his van, said Dad, sighing. Goodness knows how he's going to react. That old Chip van had been in his family for so many years. I feel so bad. It'll probably break his heart. It seems so cruel to interrupt his holiday and tell him, but I'm worried the police will have to contact him at some stage, so I'd better let him know first. I carefully made Dad a cup of tea, and he managed to balance it between his bandages and sipped from it. Then he dictated Billy's son's phone number, and I dialed it for him. Dad got through straight away, but couldn't get a word in edgeways at first. Billy the Chip was burbling away on the other end, telling Dad Sydney was wonderful, his son was wonderful, his son's wine bar was wonderful, the weather was wonderful, and Dad had to listen with an agonised expression, trying to wade into the wave after wave of wonder. I'm so glad you're enjoying yourself, Billy, mate, but I'm afraid I've got some bad news. Dad blurted out eventually. Last night there was a bit of a ruckus with some yobs. They were trying to tip the van over, and the fat in the fryer caught fire. I'm afraid the van's been burned, Billy. What? No, I'm fine. Hand's got a bit singed, that's all. Thank God Floss is fine too, but I'm not quite sure how we're going to get the van back into action. Have you got proper insurance? Oh, thank God. Because thankfully, mate, it's a total write-off. But if you can get the insurance sorted when you're back from Oz, then I'll help you buy a new van, get the business up and running again. Though I'll have to make some kind of arrangement for Floss. I'm not risking her in a van at night now. What's that? Really? You truly mean that, Billy? Dad listened. He nodded. He shook his head. He blew his breath out, his lower lip jutting. Yeah, thanks, mate, but you don't have to. No, we'll be moving on soon anyway. Definitely. Well, we've no actual concrete plans, but something's bound to bob up out of the blue. Okay then, you enjoy yourself, pal. Go for it. Bye then. Dad put the phone down. He rolled his eyes at me. He says he wants to stay in Australia and help his son with his bar. It's a boys only bar too, not really Billy's sort of place at all, but he always says he's so enjoying being with his son, he wants to stick by him. I don't know whether it will work out in the long term, but he seems sure that's what he wants. He's intent on giving up the chip van, whatever happens. He says he's thinking of putting this house on the market too, though we can stay in it for the time being. Dad made a scratch to his head and ended up patting it with his bandages. Strikes me the world's gone bonkers. Floss, still, I suppose we should be happy for Billy. He raised his mug of tea unsteadily. Here's to Billy the Chip. Here's to Billy the Chip, I repeated, and Lucky and Whiskey and Soda mewed. Hey, Dad, what about his cats? Well, he says maybe we can find a good home for them. He's thinking of having some firm pack up some of his stuff and ship it to Australia, but he can hardly do that to old Whiskey and Soda. I doubt they'd last the journey. Well, are we a good home, Dad? I asked. We haven't got a good home for us, pet, let alone Billy's manky old cats. Us, meaning you, me and Lucky. Us three, absolutely, said Dad. I made Dad and me some toast and fed all 3 cats. I felt a bit weird not going to school. I was worried about Susan stuck in our classroom in front of Rhiannon without me. Maybe I'll go into school after all, Dad, if you feel you can cope okay. Are you sure, Floss? You're probably still in a state of shock. I know I am. Yes, but you're wounded, Dad, I said, very gently stroking his bandages. I can't drive you at the moment, but I'll walk you there if you like, said Dad. I've got to go and sort out what's happening to the chip van anyway, and I've got to buy something too, a mobile phone. Then I feel I can always summon help straight away if we're in any more bother. I haven't much idea what they cost, and we better hang on to every penny now the chip van business is up the creek, but I thought about selling something. Not that I've got much left to sell, admittedly. I wondered about the cuckoo clock. I know it doesn't go anymore, but it's quite old and the carving's nice. I could take it into that antique place and see what they offer me. But it's your wedding present, Dad. Yes, I know, but your mum never really liked it, and now, well, your mum and I aren't married anymore, are we? I swallowed. Sometimes I wish you and Mum were still married, Dad, I said. I know, pet. Sometimes I still wish that too, but your mum's moved on now, literally. Maybe it's time I did too. You won't mind too much if we get rid of the cuckoo clock, will you? I'd much sooner we had a mobile, Dad. Can it be half mine too? Hey, even Rhiannon hasn't got her own mobile phone yet. It'll be so cool. We wrapped the cuckoo clock in newspaper, and Dad put it in his backpack. There was a specialist clock man in the antique centre. He sniffed at our clock a bit, but admitted it was Victorian and hand-carved. He didn't offer that much at first, but Dad argued, and eventually he gave him £100. Wow, Dad, we're rolling in it now, I said. Not really rolling in it, Floss, said Dad, but we certainly had enough to buy our mobile phone. Then we went to the station to have a look at the chip van. It had been towed back into the shed where Billy always kept it. We peered in it in silence. It was black all over, with half the roof actually burned off. Dad wound his arms around me tightly. We stood for a few seconds and then crept away again. I feel like I've let Billy down, said Dad mournfully. But he wasn't. He doesn't want his chip van any more, Dad. He said so. He might change his mind. Still, I suppose he can always buy a brand new van with his insurance money. We trudged on past the station. I knew where we were going now. Dad looked at me quizzically. I nodded. It wasn't worth walking all around the moon when the direct way to school went straight past our cafe. Harley's cafe didn't exist anymore. It was now a Starbucks. Dad stood staring at the smart green paintwork. He stepped up to the window and looked in, past the orange lamps and all the people standing at the counter and sitting at every single table and chair and sofa. He stood still and sighed softly, and then he suddenly waved. Look who's in there, he said. It's old Ron and Miss Davis. Look, they're sitting at the same table and getting on like a house on fire as far as I can see. Let's embarrass them terribly and go and say hello. We went into the cafe. It was just like stepping into any coffee bar anywhere. I looked up at the ceiling, wondering what was up there now. The girl cleaning the table looked up too, as if worried I'd spotted a leak. Yes, she said uncertainly. Who lives up there, I asked. No one. It's just the office and the storeroom, she said. It isn't a flat anymore. I think it was once, she said, like it was 100 years ago. But it was in a terrible state. Goodness knows who lived there. I glanced nervously at Dad, who was thankfully deep in conversation with old Ron and Miss Davis, gesturing theatrically with his bandaged hands. They were gasping appreciatively. "Excuse me," I said to the girl, and ran over to join my dad. Old Ron and Miss Davis were an extremely satisfying audience. They also said how much they missed Charlie's Cafe. "I'm on my beam ends drinking Starbucks coffee," said old Ron. "Talk about pricey." I didn't know what his beam was and where it ended, but I got the gist of what he was saying. "And Mr. Starbucks doesn't have a clue when it comes to making a good plain cup of tea from a nicely warmed pot," said Miss Davis, sighing. "Well, as soon as my bandages are off, I'll make you as many cups of tea and coffee as you can manage at my place," said Dad. But then he bit his lip. "Well, Billy's place. Whatever." "Is he really going to sell up?" said old Ron. "So he says. Hey, Ron, if push came to shove, you wouldn't take on his old cats, would you? Whiskey and soda. 2 very nice old lady friends." "Well," said old Ron, "in the general run of things I might say yes, but now I've got this very nice old lady friend who isn't at all keen on cats." He nudged Miss Davis in the ribs. She glared at him. "Utter nonsense. And watch what you're doing. I bruise easily," she said, but she wasn't really cross. She leaned across the table at me. "Do they catch birds?" "Oh no, Miss Davis, never in a million years. They can't catch anything. They're far too lazy and plump. They don't even crunch up their cat food properly. They just suck all the juice off the fishy chunks. But they're really lovely, kind cats. They've tried to be very motherly to my cat Lucky. I'm sure she'd like them. If you meet them, I'm sure you'd like them." "Well, if there's really no other alternative, I won't object if Ronald wants to give the creatures a proper home for their twilight years," said Miss Davis. "Old Ron and Miss Davis seem to be taking care of their twilight years," said Dad, as we continued our long rambling walk to school. "Fancy all those years of coming into my cafe and they barely spoke to each other. And then there's Billy the Chip, so stuck in his ways, he did the same thing every single day of his life. And yet now he's up sticks and swanning around Australia. Your mum too, of course," Dad sighed. "They've all moved on. I've stayed stuck. No, I haven't even done that. I've started going backwards. One moment I've got a wife, a child, my own business, and then the next, poof." But Dad was smiling at me. "I've still got the most important little person in my life. That's all that matters. Come on then, Floss. Let's get you to school. You're astronomically late. I hope you won't get a telling off. Do you want me to come in with you and explain?" I didn't think this was a good idea at all. "I'll be fine, Dad, really," I said. "Well, if you're sure, sweetheart. Schools do give me the heebie-jeebies. I always feel like I'm going to be told to stand in the corner with my hands on my head. What's your Mrs. Horsfield like, Floss? Bit of an old bag?" "She's lovely, Dad." When we approached the school, I saw a class was out in the playground doing PE. My class, with Mrs. Horsfield in her prettiest white top and shorts, showing all the class how to jog on the spot. "My goodness, is she a teacher?" Dad whispered. "She's Mrs. Horsfield, Dad, my teacher. See, I told you she was lovely," I said. "I'll say. You're a lucky girl, Floss," said Dad. "OK then, pet, you run and join all your friends. I'll come and collect you at going home time." I gave Dad a quick kiss and started racing towards the gate into school. Dad waved with his big bandaged hand. Mrs. Horsfield slowed to a standstill, panting a little. "Floss, is that your father, Mr. Barnes?" "Uh-oh," said Dad. "Looks as if I'm in trouble after all." He walked along by my side, his arms dangling. Everyone stopped jogging and stood still, staring, everyone except Susan. She came flying across the playground and met me at the school gate. She flung her arms around me and gave me a great big hug. "Hello, Susan," said Dad. "I know you two girls are best friends, but do you always greet each other with such gusto?" No, Mr. Barnes. I'm just so relieved to see Floss. I thought something awful had happened to her. One of the girls in our class said there'd been a fire in the chip van, and I was so scared you'd both been burned." "Oh, but you have been burned, Mr. Barnes. Look at your poor hands." "They're fine, dear. I've just got the bandages on to keep them nice and clean. The nurse says they'll clear up completely in a week or so." "Oh, so you've just got first-degree burns? Thank goodness," said Susan, knowledgeable as always. Mrs. Horsfield came right over to us. "OK, Susan, you get back in line, dear," she said. "Are you sure you're all right, Floss? There have been all sorts of terrible rumours running around the school. I tried phoning, but your telephone number seems to be out of order, Mr. Barnes." "Oh dear, that would be the old number, yes. Silly of me not to have let you know. I'll give the school my mobile number. We're temporarily staying at a friend's house, but I expect we're moving on soon, during the school holidays." "Flora's had to cope with quite a few changes recently," Mrs. Horsfield said quietly, careful that the others shouldn't hear her. Yes, I'm afraid she has, but she's been a little star," said Dad. "She's such a good girl, my Floss. She might not always be up to speed with her lessons. I think she's a bit of a dreamer like her old dad, but I know she tries really hard, Mrs. Horsfield." "I know she does," said Mrs. Horsfield. "Mr. Barnes, you do know you can come to see me any day after school. I always stay on in the classroom for a good half hour or so. If there's anything you want to discuss, any problems, any advice, well, that's what I'm here for." "Thank you," said Dad. I wish I'd had a smashing teacher like you when I was at school. Dad, I hissed. Dad laughed at me and pretended to punch the tip of my chin with his bandaged fist. Am I embarrassing you, darling? That's what dads are for, he said. I'll come and meet you after school, okay? He backed off across the playground. When Mrs. Horsfield blew her whistle and got everyone to start jogging again, Dad started jogging too, arms pumping, feet pounding. We could see his head bobbing up and down all the length of the school fence. Susan laughed fondly. So did some of the others. Rhiannon and Margot and Judy laughed too, but they were standing with their hands on their hips, eyebrows raised. Look at Smelly Belly Chip, said Rhiannon. Like, who does he think he is, said Margot. He's so fat. See his big bum, Smelly Belly Waggle Bum, said Judy. They all laughed harder. I hated all three of them. When Mrs. Horsfield told us to start running properly, I forged ahead, kicked Rhiannon right on her own bum, then Margot, then Judy. Kick, kick, like a hot soccer star. Then I charged out of their way before they could get back to me. I couldn't keep it out of their way forever. I couldn't keep out of anyone's way at break time. Everyone crowded round me in the cloakroom, wanting to hear all about the fire. The story had already spread rapidly and become wildly exaggerated. Dad and I had been besieged by thousands of yobs who had deliberately set the chip fan on fire with us inside. No, it wasn't like that at all, I said. So what was it like? Tell us, Floss. Yeah, come on, Floss, tell. So I started telling the whole story myself, and as I got into it, I couldn't help doing a little exaggerating myself. I had my dad leaping out of the van, knocking knives out of guys' hands, kung fu style. I demonstrated enthusiastically. I had Dad snatching Saul from a serious stabbing, protecting his girlfriend, bashing all the yobs and sending them flying. Oh wow, Floss, your dad's fantastic. That's so cool. Did he really beat them all off? Of course he didn't, said Rhiannon. Old smelly belly bum chip couldn't bash so much as a baked potato. You're telling whopping great lies, Floss. I am not. Well, he might not have hit them all, and maybe there was just one knife, but I'll tell you something, I swear this is true. When the fryer caught fire in the van, I was trapped, and I would have burned to death there and then if Dad hadn't braved the flames and fought his way over to me and carried me out, I said. Your dad's truly heroic, Floss, Susan proclaimed. Yes, isn't he? I agreed proudly. Rubbish, said Rhiannon. Yeah, like totally gross, said Margot. Judy didn't say anything, but she made a very rude noise. Take no notice of them, Floss, said Susan. They're just jealous of your lovely dad. Jealous, said Rhiannon. My dad earns $50,000 a year in his car business, and he's always buying me heaps of stuff and taking us on fantastic holidays, and people say he looks very like Tom Cruise. Plus, he doesn't smell, so why should I be jealous, Swatty Potty? Floss's dad loves her tremendously, and talks to her as if she's his special friend, and plays with her heaps and does funny things to make her laugh, and takes good care of her, said Susan. I squeezed Susan's hand, so moved I could barely speak. Rhiannon still sneered. Takes good care of her? You must be joking. My mum says it's appalling. She's thinking about going to social services and reporting Floss. What? I said. You heard me. Or if you didn't, wash your ears out and wash the rest of you, so you don't stink so much, smelly chip, said Rhiannon. Your mum isn't really going to the social services about me, is she, Rhiannon? I said. Yes, because she's truly worried about you. First your mum walks out on you. She didn't. You know she didn't. And now your dad's cafe gone bust, and you haven't got a proper home anymore, and you look a sight and you smell, and now it seems your dad's dragging you off to his chip van every night and getting into fights, and you very nearly end up getting burned to death. Your very own words, smelly chip. My mum says you need some kind of lady to look after you properly. So you wait. The social services will come and get you and put you in care if you don't watch out. Chapter 22. Rhiannon's words rang in my head all day at school. Susan kept telling me that I mustn't worry. Rhiannon was just trying to wind me up. No social worker could ever doubt that I had two parents who loved me and cared for me. I knew she was right, but I was scared all the same. When the bell went for the home time, I peered around the school gates anxiously, in case there were social workers lurking, ready to capture me. But there was Dad, smiling and waving his bandages at me. Look, there's Floss's dad. Hey, Mr. Barnes. Hello, Mr. Barnes. You're a hero. Dad grinned at all the kids in my class. Thank goodness he didn't seem to notice the three girls who walked straight past him, rudely holding their noses. How have you been today, Floss? You haven't felt funny or had any coughing fits, have you? I've been a bit worried about you, said Dad, cuddling me close. I've been a bit worried about you, Dad. How have you been today? How are your poor hands? They're okay, sweetheart. I've managed fine, though it's a bit of a palaver going to the loo. It's not that easy to cook either. I think you might have to give me a hand making tea. Glad to, Dad. But we're not having chips. I don't want to see a chip fryer for a long, long time. Are you going to give up being a chip cook, Dad? Well, I've got to work, Pet, and there's not a lot else I can do. I went down to the job centre today. The girl there was quite helpful. She even filled in the forms for me, saying I've got my hands bandaged. Lucky that, as I'm total rubbish when it comes to spelling, but she was quite frank about my chances. They're not that great. Still, you never know. Something might bob up out of the blue, we said together, and we turned the corner down Oak Crescent. There was a bright pink car parked outside Billy's house. I'd once seen a caravan exactly that colour. Dad, I said. What, Pet? Said Dad. Then he saw it too. He stopped still, staring. Come on, Dad, I said, starting to run. Hey, hang on, wait for your old dad. I left him behind and rushed to the car. Saul and Jenny were squashed up in the back. Rose was in the front, her beautiful red nails tapping a tune on her white leather steering wheel. She had 2 red velvety roses dangling from her driving mirror. Hello, I shouted. They all saw me at once. They smiled and started getting out of the car. Hello, little Floss, said Rose, and she gave me a hug. She was wearing tight black trousers and a lovely deep pink top patterned with red roses. Her toenails were painted dark red too, peeping out of her high-heeled sandals. She even smelled of red roses. I wanted to hang on to her and breathe in her lovely soft warm smell. So where's your dad then, Flossie? Said Rose. Just coming. There he is, I said, gesturing. Dad was ambling along, his arms hanging at his side, head bent bashfully. He looked really odd, as if he was shy. Well, goodness me, this is a surprise, he said. His voice sounded weird too, as if he couldn't catch his breath. He went to shake Rose's hand and then remembered his bandage. He paused awkwardly, half waving in the air. Come here, said Rose, and she gave him a big hug too. I want to thank you for looking out for my boy. I didn't really do anything, honestly, said Dad, going bright red in the face, but looking pleased all the same. How are your hands, mate? Saul asked. He waggled his sling. Look at us. Talk about the walking wounded. You're a magnet for trouble, Saul. Always have been, always will be, said Rose, shaking her head. But what about you, Mr. Barnes? Are your hands badly burned? Let's go into the house. I want you to show me. I don't trust you strong, silent types. You don't make enough fuss. I'm so glad Saul remembered the right house after all. I got a bit worried when we first knocked half an hour ago and no one was in. Still, I thought you were probably meeting your little girl from school, and I was right. My Floss, said Dad. Well, come in, all of you. We trooped into Billy's house. Whiskey and Soda and Lucky were waiting in the hall, tails in the air, yowling hopefully for tea. Whiskey and Soda backed away and hid behind the sofa, overwhelmed by all the guests. But Lucky was perkily sociable. She gave Saul and Jenny a nod and actually came and rubbed herself against Rose's shapely ankles. Hello, little cat, said Rose, bending to give her a stroke. She's my cat. She's called Lucky. Oh, she likes you, Rose, I said. Lucky was daintily licking Rose's toenails as if in homage. And I like her, darling, said Rose. She carefully stepped round Lucky into the living room. Oh, what a nice big room, she said uncertainly. Yes, you've got a lovely huge house, Mr. Barnes. Call me Charlie, please, and it's not my house. It belongs to an old pal of mine. Floss and I are only here temporarily, like. It's not a huge house, Rose, I said, puzzled. All houses seem enormous to me. To you, if you've been brought up in a caravan, said Rose. I love your cosy, rosy caravan, I said. So do I, dear, though I know it might seem a bit cramped to some people. She looked at Saul and raised her eyebrows at him. He laughed at his mum. I want a bit more space now, Mum, and a proper roof over my head. I want to live with the same girl in the same street. That's not so strange, is it? He put his arm around Jenny, who smiled and snuggled up to him. Well, said Rose, struggling, as long as you're happy, son. So how are you coping by yourself, said Dad. Oh, I get by fine. I always used to run the stall by myself when Saul was little. It's a bit of a struggle sometimes, but I manage. Talk to me about it, said Dad. So, who's looking after the stall tonight? Monday's always our quiet night, when we've just got set up. Liz from the Lucky Dart stall is supposed to be keeping an eye on it for me. Where is your fair now? I asked eagerly. Dad and I have looked and looked for it. Have you? Said Rose, looking pleased. Well, we're over in Felting this week, not too far away. Are you going to come and visit us? You bet, I said. Can we? We can, can't we, Dad? Of course, darling. Now, let's get some tea organised. Will you be a lovely helpful girl, Floss, and put the kettle on for me? Then, as I can't get out my fingers just now because perhaps you'll also like to dial the pizza place? He looked apologetically at Rose. I'd love to cook you a proper meal, but it's a bit awkward just now, as you can see. Pizza would be lovely. It's definitely our treat, though. Rose ordered 4 different king-size pizzas and the ice cream for afterwards. I had a big slice of all 4 pizzas, triple cheese and spinach, chicken and mushroom, pineapple and bacon, and sausage and sweet corn and tomato, and then a bowl of strawberry and vanilla and chocolate ice cream. Then I felt so full I had to undo the buttons on my school skirt. Saul and Jenny stayed for a while. Saul let me try on his great big rings. I had a dragon on one finger, a snake on another, 3 different skulls, an eye ring, and frogs on each thumb. They looked so cool, but then they said they had to get going because they wanted to see some film. I suppose I ought to be going too, said Rose. Oh no, do stay, I said. Your dad probably wants some peace and quiet, said Rose. I certainly don't, said Dad. Please stay a bit longer, Rose. Well, I've certainly still got to examine those poor sore hands, said Rose. We'll take some bandages off and have a look. They've given you fresh dressings, I hope. Let's see how you're healing. I peered fearfully as she gently unwound the bandages. I was terrified that Dad's fingers would have been turned black and cindery like burned toast. It was a huge relief to see they were just a little swollen and shiny red, but very recognisably still my Dad's dear fingers. Rose peered at them carefully, holding his hands in hers. Are you reading Dad's palms, Rose? I asked. I might be, said Rose, smiling. What do you say? Is Dad's luck going to change? I think maybe it already has, said Dad softly. He wasn't looking at me, he was looking at Rose. She stayed very late that evening. Dad let me stay up, but I was starting to feel very tired. I'd had hardly any sleep the night before, and a lot of excitement. I curled up in a chair with Lucky on my lap. My head started nodding. Dad tucked a cushion under my neck and covered me with his sweater. I woke up once to wriggle around and rearrange Lucky. I saw that Dad and Rose were sitting very close together on the sofa. Billy the Chip's mother and father were frowning out of their photograph at them, but Dad and Rose didn't look as if they cared one jot. When Dad came to meet me the next day from school, he said, Guess where we're going? It didn't need much power of deduction, but I played a game with Dad. Are we going shopping? Up to London? The seaside, I said, trying to seem completely innocent and dumb. Dad kept going, No, no, no. Then he said, Come on, Floss, where would you like to go most of all? I took a deep breath. The fair? I shouted. Dad whooped and punched the air with his bandaged fist and went, Yay! He still couldn't drive, of course, but he checked out how to get to Felting on the bus. He brought fruit juice and apples and nuts, so we had a snack on the journey. I thought we'd eat really healthily now, so that we can overdose on Candyfloss when we get to the fair, said Dad. Does Rose know we're coming? Oh, yes. Dad, you like Rose, don't you? Yes, of course I like her. You like her too, don't you, Floss? I think she's a very kind, lovely lady. Yeah, but I meant, do you fancy her, Dad? Floss, said Dad. His cheeks were a carnation pink. That means you do, I said. Now then, little girls shouldn't be talking about fancying people, not to their dads, said Dad. He paused. But say I did fancy Rose. Would you mind? I don't think I'd mind a bit, I said. So is Rose going to be your girlfriend, Dad? Dad flushed from carnation to peony. Well, it's early days, darling. I'm not sure a gorgeous lady like Rose would really want to spend much time with a dull old dad like me. We'll have to see. But whatever happens, Floss, you know you'll always come first with me. You're my little princess, and you always will be. I hitched right across the seat onto Dad's lap, and he gave me a big cuddle. We got off the bus at Felting Junction and found the fair on the village green. We hurried towards it, hearing the hum of the hurdy-gurdy music, smelling the fried onions and warm sugar. It was as if we were walking back into a wonderful dream. But it was all real. There was the big slide and the stargazer ride, the ghost train and the crooked cottage, the teacup whirlies and the tin can alley, the Ferris wheel and the wacky waltzer. There was the Victorian carousel with Pearl galloping around and round, her pink mane and tail flying in the wind. There was Rose's Candyfloss stall with her big pink teddy waving her fat plush paw at us. There was Rose herself, looking lovely in a low-cut pink blouse with a little red enamel rose on a gold chain. She let me go right inside her van. She even let me pour different coloured sugars into her Candyfloss cauldron, and then set it spinning so the little wisps of floss started forming. I carefully wound them around and round my stick until I'd made my very own pink, lilac and blue Candyfloss. Dad and I wandered all around the fair, and I had 3 rides on Pearl, but every 10 minutes we came back to chat to Rose. After an hour or so, she got her friend Liz from the Lucky Darts to keep an eye on the Candyfloss stall. Rose took us into her magical cosy caravan for a spot of supper. She had red wine for her and Dad, and cranberry juice for me, and little savoury tarts and battered prawns, and sausages in honey and chicken with peanut sauce, and all sorts of crisps and olives and crunchy vegetables with dips. And then there was a pink ice sponge cake with little red sugar roses, and the most amazing giant strawberries dipped in white chocolate. Oh, Rose, love, you didn't need to go to all this trouble, said Dad, but he looked absolutely thrilled about it. No trouble at all, Charlie, said Rose. I like fiddling with little bits. It's not often I have the opportunity, especially now I'm on my own. It's like party food, I said. Well, This is our little party, isn't it? Said Rose. And you and your dad could certainly do with a bit of cosseting. Dad found it a little difficult picking all his food up with his bandaged hands, so sometimes I popped a prawn or a sausage into his mouth, and then Rose fed him iced cake and strawberries. We ate and ate and ate, but there was still a lot left over when we were absolutely full. Rose packed all the snacks up in tin foil and put them in a great big red plastic box. You can take them for your dinner. At school tomorrow, Floss, she said. I shall share them with my best friend Susan, I said. Chapter 23. Susan and I had a positive feast the next day at lunchtime. Everyone looked at our food enviously, especially the cake and the chocolate strawberries. Give us a strawberry, Floss, said Rhiannon. I goggled at her astonishing cheek. No way, I said firmly. Here, Susan, have a strawberry. Aren't they delicious? I didn't really want one. I bet they taste of chip fat, said Rhiannon. Yeah, smelly chip, like we'd risk eating your dad's gross food, said Margot. Smelly belly bum chips, said Judy. They all three held their noses. I stood up and glared at them. You three are so infantile, I said. And if you'd only let go of your snotty noses and take a big sniff, you would see I don't smell of chips, on account of the fact that my dad stopped frying them. What's he going to do then, said Rhiannon. It's none of your business, said Susan. No one asked you, swatty potty, said Rhiannon. So what sort of other work can your dad do, smelly chip? That's all he knows about. Though he's not much use at that, is he? He lets your cafe go bust and he lets the chip van go up in flames. My mum says she's going to have to go to social services. She says you need someone to look after you. I took a step closer to her, to Rhiannon, so we were practically nose to nose. Well, she's quite a bit bigger than me, so we were kind of nose to chest. You tell your mum she doesn't need to worry about me any more. She can send a whole army of social workers to see me if she wants, but it's a complete waste of time. To start with, I've got my mum, and she'll be coming back this autumn. Then I've got my dad, and he's just great at looking after me. And lastly, I have my Auntie Rose. You haven't got an Auntie Rose, said Rhiannon. I have so. She came to see us on Monday, and we went to see her on Tuesday, and we're going to see each other heaps and heaps. She made me my special lunch. She's brilliant at everything, and she can tell fortunes. She's got all kinds of extraordinary occult powers, and she says I'm highly perceptive. So she's going to teach me to channel them properly. And then, when I'm up to speed, you three had better watch out. Now, would you and Margot and Judy just bog off and let Susan and me enjoy our lunch in peace? They did just that. They scuttled off, looking quite scared. Even Susan seemed a little disconcerted. You said exactly 100 words again. Do you really have occult powers, Floss? She whispered. Hey, you're meant to be the brainy one, okay? Of course not. Honestly, Floss, you make things up so they sound so real. So, haven't you even got an Auntie Rose? Well, I have, sort of. She's not a real aunt, but she's now a new friend of my dad's, and she's ever so nice, and she does tell fortunes, and I'm sure she really will teach me if I ask her nicely. And she made the food for us, so she is a really brilliant cook, isn't she? Susan, would you mind if I saved that biggest strawberry, the one with the most chocolate? Not at all. It's your lunch, after all. It's not for me. I wanted to save it for Mrs. Horsfield. I put it on her desk at the start of the afternoon school. This is a little present for you, Mrs. Horsfield, I said shyly. Oh, Floss, it looks lovely. But I can't eat your special strawberry, sweetheart. I've chomped my way through your special ice buns with a cherry on top. It's your turn for a treat, Mrs. Horsfield, I said. Well, thank you very much, Floss, said Mrs. Horsfield. She took a big bite of chocolate strawberry, breathed in and went, mmm. She rolled it around her tongue. It's delicious. My Auntie Rose made it, I said proudly. I didn't know you had an auntie, said Mrs. Horsfield, sounding delighted. Well, she moved away, I said vaguely, but now she's moved nearer again. Felting wasn't really that near, but Dad and I caught the bus over to the fair again on Friday night. We spent most of Saturday there too. Rose let me serve Candyfloss again. I even managed to give the right change to people, even though I'm such rubbish at maths. Dad hung out with us a lot of the time, but then he went off for a stroll and palled up with Jeff, the guy in charge of the Stargazer ride. He was having a spot of bother changing a dodgy wheel. Dad couldn't help much because he still had his bandages on, but he squatted down beside Jeff and peered at all the silver nuts and bolts and talked earnest engine talk. Look at them, said Rose fondly. Does your dad know much about machinery, Floss? Well, he thinks he does, I said. Rose roared with laughter. You're like a little old woman at times, she paused. Then she looked at me straight in the eye. So, what do you think about your dad and me, eh, darling? I shrugged shyly. I know it's early days yet, but your dad and me, well, we really seem to hit it off, she said. Yep, I said. And this time, when we move on tomorrow, we're going to make sure we stay in touch. That's great, I said. We both paused to serve 2 customers with pink and lilac Candyfloss. Rose went on winding a stick around and around the sugar cauldron, even though she wasn't making candy floss for anyone else. I know I'm quite a bit older than your dad, she said. Are you? I said, surprised. I didn't know that. You don't look it. Oh, sweetheart, thank you, she said. I also know just how close you and your dad are, and that's lovely. I want you to understand I don't want to get in the way of that. When my Saul was young, I had a few boyfriends who were rather hard for him to handle. It caused quite a lot of trouble. Rose stirred and stirred, her candy floss getting bigger and bigger. So, is Dad your boyfriend now? I asked. He says you're his girlfriend. Did he? Do you mind? I thought about it very carefully. I used to think I'd mind if Dad had a girlfriend, but I don't seem to mind a bit if it's you, Rose. That candy floss is simply ginormous now. Yeah, well, it's a special big fluffy floss for you, said Rose, handing it over with a flourish. I ate it as carefully as I could, but I still ended up with sticky sugar all over my cheeks and spangling my ears and nose. You've even got wisps in your hair, said Rose, picking them out carefully. You've got such lovely fluffy curls, darling. You're just like candy floss yourself. She played with my hair, fluffing it about. Yes, if we coloured it pale pink, you'd look like a perfect candy floss. Ooh, could we? I don't know what your dad would say. I can get round Dad, I said. Yes, I'm sure you can, sweetie, but what would they say at school if you turned up with pink hair? We've only got one more week and then it's the holidays. All right then. When you've actually broken up, we'll see about turning you into a real candy floss, okay? I told Susan that Rose had promised to colour my hair for me. You lucky thing, she said. It'll look prettier than ever. But promise it won't make you go all silly and clothes mad and boy crazy like Rhiannon and Margot and Judy. I promise, silly, I said, giving her a hug. Maybe you could come to the fair with Dad and me one day, and Rose will colour your hair too. My mum would go demented, said Susan. Well, we could pretend it was like spraying your hair red for comic relief. Oh, Susan, if I get my hair dyed pink, I'll match Pearl. She's this horse on the roundabout. She's got a wonderful pink mane and tail. She's snowy white with big blue eyes. She's my absolute favourite. But you can have first go on her when we come to the fair with me. Sapphire's lovely too. She's white as well, but with a blue mane. And Amber's great too. He's a glossy brown with a yellow mane and tail. You sound like you belong to the fair already, said Susan. Oh, I wish, I said. I worried that we wouldn't be going to the fair so much the next week because they moved on way past Felting to a town called Bromshaw, about 40 miles away. But Dad went back to see the doctor on Monday morning and had his burns inspected, and she said they were healing beautifully. He could leave his bandages off and drive the van again. It feels so good, Floss, said Dad, waggling his fingers at me one by one. It's great to have my wheels back too. Let's go for a drive, darling. How about checking out the fair at Bromshaw? I thought it'd be fun to see if it looks completely different there. I looked at Dad. You think Rose will be selling burgers and Pearl will be stuck onto the Stargazer ride, I said. No. Are you teasing me, Floss? Of course I'm teasing you, Dad. We don't need any excuse. Let's go to the fair. You can always do your homework in the van. Haven't got any homework, Dad. We break up on Friday. Oh, lummy, yes, Dad sighed. What are you going to do with you? What am I going to do with you during the holidays, sweetheart? I'll have to find some kind of job to keep us going, and I very much doubt I'll be able to take you with me. Dad paused. Maybe it's time for you to go and join your mum, darling. We've had a lovely time together, but I've been having sleepless nights worrying about you. Don't worry, Dad, I'm fine. We'll work something out for the summer. I held my hands out in front of my face, palms up. Aha! Rose isn't the only one who can tell fortunes. I can see a big curvy line on each palm. They're like smiley faces. That means I'm going to be very, very happy. I hope so, darling. Listen, I was wondering. Susan's dad seems a very nice chap, and he did say he owed us. Do you think you could play around at Susan's some of the time? Once I get a job I can offer to pay. That would be great, Dad, though it might do my head in if they kept trying to teach me all the time. But they're going to their house in France. I don't know. There's them with 2 houses, and here we are without any. Well, maybe it's good to travel light, like Rose and all the fairground people, I said. We had another lovely evening at the fair. Eddie the roundabout man had become such an old pal by now, he utterly refused to take any pound for the ride. In fact, you can do me a favour, Floss. I need to test out all my gallopers to make sure they're all safe and solidly fixed. Perhaps you'll be an angel and ride them each in turn. I think he was just being sweet to me, but I wasn't going to argue. While I was test riding every horse on the roundabout, Dad had another chat with the Stargazer guy, and then he bought burgers and chips from one of the vans, and had a long discussion about fat and fryers and types of sauce and vinegar. But most of the time we hung out around Rose's stall. Dad had several goes on Liz's Lucky Dart stall to be polite, and amazingly scored 180. Well, Liz insisted he had, taking the darts out of the board so quickly we couldn't really check. She gave Dad a huge blue plush teddy, the twin of Rose's pink bear. "Here you are, Floss," said Dad, thrusting a vast armful of bear at me. "Thank you very much, Dad, but I think I may be getting too big for bears," I said. "Well, who can we give it to?" said Dad. "Tiger might like him, but he won't be back for months. Anyway, I've already given him Kanga. What about Susan? Is she too big for bears too? She's not really into cuddly toys, Dad." "Well then," Dad turned to Rose with a big smile, "you wouldn't like to hang him alongside your pink bear, would you?" "I think that's a lovely idea," said Rose. "We'll hook him up right at this minute. Come here, Blue Ted. Come and make friends with Pinky." "He looks a bit of a bear compared with her," said Dad. "We'd better kit him out with some clothes." "Hey, I know an outfit that would be absolutely perfect," I said, chuckling. "A blue denim outfit. I can sew the skirt into shorts easy peasy, and the denim cap will look really cute, tucked over one ear." Dad took me on the dodgems too. I didn't really like it much, especially when we got bumped, but I squealed and laughed and pretended because Mike, the owner, let us go on for free, as we were friends of Rose. Mike's daughter Ella collected the money on the dodgems. She was only a year or so older than me, but she was much taller, a really tough tomboy girl who leapt lightly from car to car, her money belt tight around her slim hips. She sorted everyone out, and swore cheerfully at any boys daft enough to try to cheek her or chat her up. We went for an ice cream together while Dad and Mike were having a chat, but I hardly dared say a word to her. "You don't say much, do you?" she said, licking her ice cream with her pink pointy tongue. I just shrugged my shoulders and licked too. "You've got a tongue, I can see it," said Ella. "So speak." "Have you been with the fair all your life?" I mumbled. "Yeah, my family have always been showmen. Well, my dad used to ride the Wheel of Death, but then he saved up enough to buy his dodgems." She grinned. "They're mine too." "That's really cool," I said. "I didn't know children could work at the fair." "I'm not a little kid," said Ella. "My brothers work later on, after dark. We all help out. It's what you do at a fair." "Well, I always helped my dad," I said. "He used to have a cafe. I acted like a waitress at weekends. I even got tips." "So how come you're so friendly with Rose? Are your dad and Rose an item?" I shrugged again. "Sort of. We all love Rose. She's generally useless at picking men, though. They always let her down." "My dad never lets anyone down," I said fiercely. "Yeah, he seems like a nice bloke," said Ella, "even though he's a flatty." "A fatty?" I said. "He's not. Well, he's a bit plump, but he's not really fat." "No," I said, "flatty. You're one too. Punters, customers." She pretended to smoke her chocolate flake. I copied her. "I've got real cigarettes if you want one," she said, reaching in her jeans pocket. No thanks, I've given up," I said quickly. She laughed at me, but not unkindly. I decided I liked Ella, even though I was a bit scared of her. I hoped we might be friends, though not, of course, a best friend like Susan. It was so sad at school on our last day before we broke up for the summer holidays. "I'm going to miss you all so much, Susan," I said, nudging up close to her at her desk. "I'm going to miss you," said Susan, giving my hand a quick squeeze. Rhiannon made silly kissy noises behind us. We took no notice of her. "I'll write heaps from France." "Yes, do. Only not in French. I know what you're like, Susan." "Moi?" said Susan, laughing. "I'll text you on my dad's mobile, and even though I'll probably see my cousins out in France, and maybe some of the stepbrothers and stepsisters too, I'll feel so lonely without you, Floss." Rhiannon made disgusting vomit sounds. "Perhaps you'd better run to the toilets if you're feeling sick, Rhiannon," said Mrs. Horsfield. "It's not fair, Mrs. Horsfield. You always take their side. It's like they're your special favourites," said Rhiannon. "And they didn't even give you a proper goodbye present, just that babyish homemade thing." Rhiannon had given Mrs. Horsfield a huge box of chocolates and a bottle of champagne. Mrs. Horsfield paused. She fingered the blue denim pencil case Susan and I had made her as a goodbye present. We'd embroidered it with a pink cherry bun and written our very favourite teacher in chain stitch. "You've all given me lovely presents," said Mrs. Horsfield. "I'm very lucky to have such sweet and delightful pupils. As a teacher, I try very hard to be impartial. But do you know something, Rhiannon? I'm a human being too. Sometimes you simply can't help having favourites." Susan and I hung back at going home time so we could both give Mrs. Horsfield a big goodbye hug. Then we had to have our goodbye hug, and that was so hard. But eventually I jumped in the van beside Dad and waved until Susan was out of sight. "I hate saying goodbye to people," I sniffed. "I know, pet. Still, you'll see Susan quite soon, when she gets back from her holiday." "I wish we were going on holiday, Dad," I said, sighing. "I know we can't help it, and I'm not really complaining, but it's going to be horrible just stuck at Billy's house all summer." "Well," said Dad, "I've got this idea, Floss. We don't have to do it if you don't want to. It's maybe crazy, but how would you like to join up with a fair for a few weeks?" "What? Really? Dad, I want to. Rose and I have had a long talk. She's so lovely, isn't she? I can't believe my luck. But anyway, she needs someone to help her out. For all she's so independent. And I've been talking to some of the guys, and they always need someone to help build up and pull down the rides. I'm a bit long in the tooth, but they can't always get lads nowadays. I wouldn't make much money, but there's a chance I can help out on the burger stall, maybe making chip butties if there's a call for it. Only you'd stay safe in Rose's caravan, okay? How do you feel about it? Oh, Dad, yes. So you're really up for it, Floss? You bet I am. It's just for the summer holidays, to see how it works out. I don't know what we'll tell your mum. She's always hated fairs. We can say we're touring around the countryside for the summer. That's sort of true, I said. Oh, Dad, it'll be so great. I'm so lucky. I paused. Oh, no. What about Lucky? She can come too. She's a streetwise little cat. I think she'll take to a travelling life okay, though whiskey and soda will have to go to old Ron and Miss Davis. Rose says we can rig up Saul's old caravan as a very special bedroom for you. You can have Lucky and her duvet in with you. There'll be room for your silver chest. Rose says she'll paint flowers all over it if that's what you'd like. You can have Billy's dollhouse too, and space for your funny woolly toys and books and sewing stuff. And I haven't forgotten your swing. Every site we pitch up, we'll find a good tree and fix it up for you. So, we won't be flatties anymore. We'll be fairground folk. I suppose so, yes. Fairground kids are expected to help out. Can I help you, Dad? You always do, darling. And can I help Rose with her Candyfloss stall? She's counting on it. Dad, there's just one more thing. What's that, Princess? Promise you'll say yes. What is it you want, darling? Can I have my hair dyed pink? What? Absolutely not, said Dad. But I'm very good at getting around him. And that is the end of Candyfloss by Jacqueline Wilson. Really hope you enjoyed that story, guys. I'll be back soon with lots more stories and videos on my channel. If you'd like to subscribe or hit a like, that's always appreciated. Thanks for listening. Take care. Bye-bye.